The Manhattan skyline glittered like a promise kept, its steel towers piercing the dusk as Donald Carter, 38, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Tribeca loft. Below, the city pulsed, taxis honking, pedestrians weaving, ambition humming in the air. This was his domain, the world he'd clawed his way into from a cramped Brooklyn apartment where he'd grown up with a single mom and big dreams. Now, as the mastermind behind Carter & Sons, a tech-driven real estate empire worth $100 million, Donald was no longer the kid scraping by. He was a king in a city that crowned only the relentless. Donald's reflection stared back, sharp jaw, dark eyes, a tailored navy suit that screamed power. At 38, he was lean, driven, the kind of man who closed deals with a handshake and a stare that said he'd already won. 15 years ago, he'd walked into Carter & Sons as a hungry NYU grad, armed with a finance degree and a chip on his shoulder. The company, then a struggling firm run by his father-in-law, Richard Hayes, was bleeding cash. Donald changed that. He turned failing projects into gold, secured landmark deals like the Hudson Yards redevelopment, and doubled revenue in a decade. To him, Carter & Sons wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, forged in late nights, missed vacations, and countless sacrifices. His wife, Melania Hayes, 35, was the other half of his world, or so he thought. Elegant, ambitious, with chestnut hair and a smile that charmed boardrooms, Melania was Richard's only child, the polished face of the Hayes brand. They'd met at a company gala, her poise catching his eye as she navigated the room like royalty. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Dinners at Lou Bernardine, weekends in the Hamptons, a proposal on a yacht under 4th of July fireworks. Donald believed they were partners, building a life and an empire together. Melania's laughter, her touch, her whispered dreams of their future, they'd anchored him through the grind. But the real power lay with Richard Hayes, 65, a silver-haired patriarch whose charm masked a ruthless streak. Richard had built Carter & Sons in the 80s, a scrappy outfit that rode the real estate boom. By the time Donald joined, Richard's vision had stagnated, his deals mired in old-school tactics. Donald's innovations, tech integrations, sustainable designs, global partnerships, saved the firm, but Richard still ruled like a king, his Upper East Side penthouse a court where loyalty was demanded, not earned. To Donald, Richard was both mentor and obstacle, a man who praised his wins but never shared the throne. Donald turned from the window, his loafers silent on the hardwood. The loft was a masterpiece, exposed brick, modern art, a view that screamed success. Melania was due home soon from a charity gala, her absence a familiar ache. Work had always come first for both of them, but lately, her silences felt heavier, her smiles less warm. He pushed the thought aside, pouring a bourbon and settling at the Marble Island with his laptop. A new deal was brewing, a $50 million acquisition in Singapore. It was risky, but Donald thrived on risk. He'd already mapped the numbers, the partners, the timeline. This was his game, and he played to win. His phone buzzed. A text from Mia Torres, his assistant of 7 years. Board meeting tomorrow. 10 a.m. Richards pushing a strategic shift. Heads up. Mia, 29, was sharp, loyal, with a knack for spotting trouble. Donald frowned. Richards' shifts usually meant micromanaging or posturing for investors. He typed back, details. Mia's reply was quick, not sure yet. Something feels off. I'll dig. Donald set the phone down, his gut tightening. He trusted Mia's instincts. She'd saved him from bad deals before. If she sensed trouble, it was real. The front door clicked open, and Melania swept in, her emerald dress catching the light. Long day? Donald asked, rising to kiss her cheek. She nodded, slipping off her heels. Exhausting. The gala raised $1 million, though. Her voice was smooth, but her eyes didn't meet his. She poured a glass of wine, her movements practiced, distant. You're working late again, she said, glancing at his laptop. Always, he replied, forcing a smile. Singapore deals heating up. She hummed, sipping her wine, already halfway to the bedroom. Don't stay up too long. Donald watched her go, the bourbon bitter on his tongue. This was their life, parallel tracks, intersecting less each year. He'd built Carter & Sons for them, for the family they'd planned but never started. Every deal, every sacrifice, was for a future where they'd stand together at the top. But doubt crept in, a whisper he couldn't shake. Melania was still Richard's daughter, raised in his shadow, schooled in his games. And Richard? He'd always seen Donald as a means to an end, not a son. Tomorrow's board meeting loomed. Donald closed his laptop, the city's glow filling the room. He didn't know it yet, but the empire he'd built was about to test him, not his skill, but his soul. 15 years of loyalty were about to collide with a betrayal he never saw coming, and the man who'd risen from nothing would have to fight to keep everything. The Hayes Upper East Side penthouse glowed under a crystal chandelier, its dining room a stage for Manhattan's elite. Donald Carter, 38, sat at the mahogany table, the clink of silverware and hum of conversation filling the October air. The scent of roasted lamb and red wine mingled with the tension he couldn't quite place. His wife, Melania Hayes, 35, sat beside him, radiant in a sapphire gown, her smile polished but distant. Across the table, his father-in-law, Richard Hayes, 65, held court, his silver hair catching the candlelight. To Donald, this was supposed to be a routine family dinner, a rare pause in the grind of running Carter and Sons, their $100 million real estate empire. He was wrong. Donald adjusted his tie, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Richard's cousins, aunts, and a few board members chatted about Hampton's vacations and stock portfolios, their laughter grating against his unease. Mia Torres, his assistant, had texted earlier, "Richard's pushing a strategic shift. Something's off." The warning gnawed at him, but he pushed it down, sipping his bourbon. 15 years of loyalty, turning Richard's failing firm into a powerhouse, had earned him trust, hadn't it? He'd doubled revenue, secured the Hudson Yards deal, sacrificed sleep and dreams. Surely, this dinner was just another of Richard's theatrics. Richard stood, raising his glass, his voice warm but laced with something sharper. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes glinting as they met Donald's. The table echoed the toast, glasses clinking. Then Melania's hand brushed Donald's, her touch cold. She rose, her posture perfect, her voice smooth as silk. "Donald," she said, pausing as if savoring the moment, "we've decided. My new partner, James, will lead the company moving forward." The words slammed into Donald like a freight train. His grip tightened on his glass, the bourbon trembling. James Dalton, 32, a slick Wall Street type with a smug grin, leaned back across the table, his tailored suit screaming privilege. Donald's pulse thundered, but he forced his face to stay neutral, a skill honed in countless boardroom battles. The room carried on, cousins laughing, aunts sipping wine, as if his world hadn't just cracked open. Melania sat, avoiding his gaze, her lips a thin line. Richard's smile was a blade, sharp and deliberate. "A strategic shift," Richard said, settling into his chair, his tone casual, like he was discussing the weather. "James brings a fresh perspective. He'll elevate Carter and Sons to new heights." James nodded, his smirk widening, as if he'd already claimed the throne. Donald's mind raced. James had no experience in real estate, no track record beyond trading stocks and flashing charm. This wasn't a promotion, it was a coup, and Melania's silence was complicity. Donald's voice was steady when he spoke, betraying none of the fire in his chest. "Interesting choice. What's the rationale?" Richard's eyes narrowed, but his smile held. "The board agrees it's time for innovation. You've done well, Donald, but we need new blood." The lie stung. Donald had built the empire. Every deal, every expansion bore his mark. He glanced at Melania, searching for a flicker of regret, but her face was a mask, her hands folded in her lap. She'd rehearsed this, planned it, chosen her father's game over their marriage. The dinner dragged on, plates cleared, dessert served. Donald played his part, nodding, smiling, while his mind churned. He noticed James whispering to a board member, their glances darting his way. Richard's cousin, a loyalist, toasted to family progress, her eyes skipping over Donald. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was orchestrated, a public dismantling of his legacy. He excused himself, stepping onto the penthouse balcony, the city's chill biting through his suit. The skyline, once his triumph, now mocked him. Alone, Donald's composure cracked. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. 15 years, weekends lost, vacations skipped, nights spent poring over contracts, had built Carter and Sons. He'd turned Richard's crumbling firm into a name synonymous with power. For what? To be cast aside like an employee past his prime? Melania's words echoed, "My new partner, James." Partner. The word twisted, implying more than business. Was she leaving him, too? The thought burned, but he shoved it down. He needed clarity, not rage. Back inside, Donald caught Melania's eye as she laughed at James's joke, her hand grazing his arm. The sight was a knife to his gut. Richard watched, smug, as if daring Donald to react. But Donald was no fool. He'd learned long ago, in Brooklyn's tough streets, to play the long game. He returned to the table, his smile a weapon. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, his voice smooth. Richard's brow twitched, but he nodded. The game was on. That night, in their Tribeca loft, Donald lay awake, the city's hum a distant roar. Melania slept, her breathing even, oblivious to the storm in his mind. He replayed the dinner, the smugness, the silence, the betrayal. Richard had always seen him as a tool, not a son. But Melania? He trusted her, loved her, built a life for them. Her complicity cut deeper than Richard's scheming. Doubt crept in. Had she ever been his partner, or just her father's pawn? By dawn, Donald was in his home office, the skyline gray and unyielding. His laptop glowed, emails from Mia piling up, board's meeting tomorrow to vote on James. Richard's rallying votes. Donald's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a demotion, it was erasure. But he wasn't the kid from Brooklyn anymore, scraping for scraps. He was Donald Carter, the man who'd built an empire. If Richard and Melania thought they could bury him, they'd forgotten one thing. He knew how to fight. And he'd make them regret crossing him. The glass-walled lobby of Carter & Sons Midtown headquarters buzzed with Monday morning energy, but to Donald Carter, 38, it felt like a battlefield. His polished loafers clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing the betrayal from last night's dinner at the Hayes Upper East Side penthouse. Melania's words still burned. "My new partner, James, will lead the company." His wife's rehearsed tone, her father Richard's smug grin, and James Dalton's arrogant smirk replayed in his mind. 15 years of building a $100 million empire, and they thought they could erase him. They were wrong. Donald's jaw was set, his dark eyes scanning the bustling employees. Whispers trailed him, assistants stealing glances, executives avoiding eye contact. The news was spreading, a corporate wildfire. His phone buzzed with a text from Mia Torres, his loyal assistant of 7 years. Board meeting, 10 a.m. Richard's pushing hard for James. Get here fast. Mia, 29, had a nose for trouble, and her urgency confirmed what Donald feared. This wasn't just a demotion. It was a coup. In the elevator, Donald's reflection stared back, sharp suit, sharper resolve. He built Carter & Sons from a sinking ship into a Manhattan titan, doubling revenue and landing deals like Hudson Yards. Richard Hayes, 65, might own the name, but Donald owned the success. Yet last night, Melania, 35, had sat silent as her father handed his legacy to James, a 32-year-old Wall Street nobody with no skin in the game. The betrayal cut deeper than Donald expected, not just from Richard's predictable power plays but from Melania's complicity. Had their marriage been a lie, too? The boardroom was a sleek arena of glass and steel, the Manhattan skyline framing the tension. Richard sat at the head, his silver hair gleaming, his smile a calculated mask. James lounged beside him, exuding the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. Melania, a board member, sat across, her emerald eyes fixed on her notes, avoiding Donald's gaze. The other executives, Richard's old allies and a few spineless opportunists, shifted uncomfortably as Donald took his seat, his presence a silent challenge. Richard opened with a PowerPoint, his voice smooth. Carter & Sons needs bold leadership. James Dalton brings innovation, vision, a fresh perspective. A slide flashed, strategic transition plan. It outlined Donald's step back to an advisory role, stripping him of power. His achievements, $500 million in deals, global expansions, were erased, reduced to a footnote. James, with zero real estate experience, was pitched as the savior. Donald's blood boiled, but he kept his face stone, his hands folded. "Questions?" Richard asked, his eyes daring Donald to speak. Donald leaned forward, his voice calm but lethal. "This plan assumes I agree. Why should I?" Richard's smile tightened. "The board supports progress, Donald. You've done well, but it's time for new blood." A lie, and the room knew it. A few executives glanced at Melania, expecting her to weigh in. She didn't. Her silence was a blade, cutting deeper than Richard's words. Donald saw it now. She wasn't just complicit, she was an architect of this betrayal. The meeting ended with a vote scheduled for tomorrow. Richard's allies nodded like puppets, but a few board members hesitated, their eyes flickering to Donald. He seized the moment, cornering one after the meeting, a veteran executive who'd seen his deals firsthand. "You know I built this," Donald said, voice low. "James is a gamble. You ready to bet the company on him?" The man's pause was all Donald needed. Seeds of doubt were planted. Back in his office, Donald's calm cracked. He paced, the skyline mocking him through the glass. Mia burst in, her tablet glowing. "Richard's been working the board for weeks," she said. "He's promised James's allies bonuses, stakes in new projects." Donald's fists clenched. "And Melania?" Mia hesitated. "She's been meeting James privately. Emails, calls, dinners. It's not just business." The words hit like a punch. Donald sank into his chair, the room spinning. His wife wasn't just betraying his career, she was replacing him entirely. Mia slid a document across his desk, the shareholder agreement. "You own 55%, she said. "Richard's plan needs your vote to pass. He's banking on you folding." Donald's eyes narrowed. He'd secured that majority years ago after a near-disastrous deal, a safeguard Richard either forgot or ignored. It was his ace, but he needed more. He needed leverage to dismantle their narrative. The final blow came that afternoon. In the executive lounge, Donald overheard James boasting to a board member, "Once I'm in, we're cleaning house. Carter's out. His team's next." Mia was on that list. The arrogance ignited something in Donald, not rage, but clarity. He checked his email, finding a message Melania had forwarded to James weeks ago. "Dad's right. You're the future." Donald's too stuck in his ways. His heart hardened. This wasn't just a power grab, it was personal. Donald left the office, the city's hum a distant roar. In his Tribeca loft, he stood at the window, bourbon in hand. Melania was at another gala, or so she claimed. The skyline, once his triumph, now reflected his isolation. Richard wanted his empire. Melania wanted a new king. James wanted his throne. But Donald wasn't done. He built Carter and Sons from nothing, and he'd fight to keep it, not for them, but for himself. Tomorrow's vote was their move. His counterattack was coming, and it would shake their world. The Manhattan skyline loomed beyond the windows of Donald Carter's Tribeca loft, its steel spires a silent witness to the war brewing inside him. At 38, Donald was no stranger to battles. He built Carter and Sons into a $100 million real estate empire through grit and guile. But the betrayal at the Hayes Upper East Side penthouse 2 nights ago had cracked something deep. Melania's words, "My new partner, James, will lead the company," and her silence as Richard handed his legacy to a smug Wall Street outsider, James Dalton, burned like acid. Now, with a board vote looming to cement his erasure, Donald wasn't just fighting for his empire. He was fighting for himself. In his home office, the glow of his laptop cut through the pre-dawn dark. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. His assistant, Mia Torres, 29, had sent a flurry of emails. Richard's locked in 6 board votes. James is promising bonuses. Melania is meeting investors. The coup was in motion, but Donald held a trump card, 55% ownership of Carter and Sons, secured years ago after a near-failed deal. Richard, 65, thought he could bully him out. Melania, 35, thought her silence would break him. They'd underestimated the man who'd risen from Brooklyn's streets. Donald's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up contracts, financials, and shareholder agreements. His 55% stake was ironclad, but a vote alone wouldn't stop Richard's influence. The patriarch's charm had swayed boards before, and James's slick promises were gaining traction. Donald needed leverage, something to shatter their narrative. He texted Mia, "Dig into Richard's accounts. Anything off?" Mia's reply was instant. "Already on it. Give me till 8 a.m. Her loyalty, untainted by Richard's games, was a lifeline. By sunrise, Donald was in his midtown office at Carter and Sons, the glass tower humming with tension. Employees whispered, their glances darting his way. The board vote was set for tomorrow, and the air crackled with uncertainty. Mia burst in, her tablet glowing. "Found it," she said, sliding a file across his desk. Richard funneled $10 million into an offshore account, consulting fees that don't exist. It's shady, possibly illegal. Donald's eyes scanned the numbers, his pulse quickening. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a scandal that could tank the company's reputation. He leaned back, the skyline framing his resolve. Exposing Richard would hurt Carter and Sons, maybe even Melania. For a moment, he hesitated. Memories of their early years, dinners at Le Bernardin, her laugh on their Hamptons weekends, flashing through his mind. But then he saw her at the dinner, silent as Richard crowned James. He saw her email to James, "You're the future." Mercy was a weakness he couldn't afford. "Keep this quiet," he told Mia. "We use it only if we have to." Donald shifted gears, moving like a chess master. He met discreetly with key board members, starting with Ellen Shin, a veteran executive who'd seen his deals save the company. Over coffee in a quiet midtown cafe, he laid out facts, his track record, the Hudson Yards triumph, James's inexperience. "Richard's gambling our future on a rookie," he said, his voice steady. "You've seen me deliver. Can you say the same for Dalton?" Ellen's nod was subtle, but it was enough. Two more board members followed, swayed by Donald's calm logic over Richard's bluster. The plot twisted that afternoon. Mia uncovered Melania's latest move. She was pitching investors, claiming Donald was burned out and unfit to lead. The lie was gaining traction, with two major stakeholders leaning toward James. Donald's anger flared, but he channeled it. He called a tech mogul he'd partnered with on a Singapore deal, planting doubts about James's readiness. "Carter & Sons thrives because I take risks that work," he said. "Dalton's a paper trader. You want him betting your millions." The mogul's pause was a victory. Back home, Donald faced Melania in their loft, the tension thick as she sipped wine in a silk robe. "You're spreading lies," he said, voice low. "Burned out? Really?" Melania's eyes flickered, but she doubled down. "You're too emotional, Donald. Step aside gracefully." Her words were a slap, confirming she'd chosen her father's empire over their marriage. "You think you can erase me?" he said, stepping closer. "I built this. Not you. Not James." Melania's composure cracked, but she turned away, leaving silence in her wake. That night, Donald worked late, the city's hum fueling his resolve. Mia sent a final bombshell. James was planning to fire Donald's team, starting with her, once he took over. The arrogance lit a fire in Donald. He pulled up the shareholder agreement, his 55% stake a fortress. Richard and Melania expected him to fold, to walk away quietly. They didn't know the man they'd betrayed. Tomorrow's board meeting was their endgame, but Donald was rewriting the rules. He wasn't just saving his empire, he was taking it back, and they'd feel the weight of their mistake. The boardroom of Carter & Sons Midtown headquarters gleamed under fluorescent lights, its glass walls framing a tense Manhattan morning. Donald Carter, 38, strode in last, his tailored suit a second skin, his dark eyes burning with resolve. The betrayal at the Hayes penthouse, Melania's cold words, "My new partner, James, will lead the company," and Richard's smug coup had pushed him to the edge. But today, with a board vote set to seal his fate, Donald was no longer the loyal son-in-law. He was a warrior, and this $100 million empire was his to reclaim. Richard Hayes, 65, sat at the table's head, his silver hair a crown of false authority. James Dalton, 32, the Wall Street pretender, smirked beside him, his arrogance a beacon. Melania Hayes, 35, Donald's wife, or was she, sat across, her elegant poise masking the storm Donald knew she felt. The board, executives loyal to Richard, a few swayed by Donald's quiet campaign, watched in silence. The air crackled with stakes higher than money, power, loyalty, legacy. Donald took his seat, his presence a silent command. The game ended now. Richard opened, his voice smooth as ever. "The vote today ensures Carter & Sons' future. James Dalton is the leader we need." He nodded to James, who launched into a rehearsed pitch about innovation and global vision. The board listened, but Donald saw cracks, hesitant glances, fidgeting hands. His meetings with key members, his facts about James's inexperience, had taken root. Richard's empire was built on fear, but Donald's was built on results, and the board knew it. When James finished, Donald stood, sliding a folder across the table. "This is the shareholder agreement," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the room's hum. "I own 55%. No leadership change happens without my approval. Your plan, Richard, is dead." Gasps rippled. Richard's face reddened, his charm faltering. "You're out of line, Donald," he snapped. Donald didn't blink. He pressed a remote, and the wall screen lit up with a financial audit, detailing $10 million funneled by Richard into an offshore account, disguised as consulting fees. "This is who you're backing," Donald said, his gaze sweeping the board. "A man who risks our reputation, our future, for personal gain." The room froze. Executives whispered, eyes darting to Richard. His allies squirmed, their loyalty crumbling. Melania's hands tightened in her lap, her mask slipping. Donald turned to James, his voice ice. "You have two choices. Work under me or walk out now." James's smirk vanished. Red-faced, he shoved his chair back and stormed out, his exit a public humiliation. Richard tried to rally. "This is a family matter," he said, voice low. "No," Donald cut in. "This is a corporate matter. As majority shareholder, I protect this company from corruption." He slid another document forward. "Resign, Richard. Transfer your shares to me, or this audit goes public tomorrow." The ultimatum hung heavy. Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes meeting Donald's, not with arrogance, but with defeat. After a long pause, he signed the resignation papers, his hand shaking. The board exhaled, the tide turned. Melania lingered as the room cleared, her eyes searching Donald's. "You planned this," she whispered, voice trembling. "You knew." Donald leaned back, his gaze unyielding. "I knew you'd choose him over me. I just didn't expect it to hurt this much." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned and left, the doors click a final note in their marriage. Weeks later, Donald stood in his office, the Manhattan skyline glittering below. Carter and Sons thrived under his sole leadership, new deals in Singapore and London pushing stock prices skyward. Headlines screamed, "Donald Carter, the man who reclaimed his empire." Business Insider called it a masterclass in corporate warfare. Forbes dubbed him Wall Street's new titan. Donald sipped bourbon, the taste sharp, like his clarity. He'd won, not with rage, but with strategy, turning betrayal into triumph. Richard faded into obscurity, his influence gone. Stripped of his shares and board seats, he was a ghost in the city he once ruled. Melania tried to reach out, her text a mix of apologies and pleas. "I made a mistake. Can we talk?" Donald deleted them without reply. She'd chosen her father's game, and now she was alone, her polished facade cracked. James vanished from the scene, his Wall Street swagger no match for Donald's resolve. Donald's transformation was deeper than victory. Once the loyal son-in-law, he trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Now, he was untouchable, his empire a fortress built on one truth: loyalty was earned, not owed. He met Mia for coffee, promoting her to chief of staff. "You stuck by me," he said, handing her the contract. Mia grinned. "Someone had to keep you sharp." Her faith, unlike Melania's, was real. That night, on his penthouse balcony, Donald looked out at the city, a sprawling, restless beast he'd tamed. The bourbon warmed his chest, but the fire inside was his own. Richard and Melania had tried to erase him, to steal what he built. They'd failed because Donald wasn't just a man with a stake. He was the architect of an empire, and no one would take it again. The skyline stretched before him, endless like his ambition. This wasn't the end. It was his beginning,